With so many cool heroes in Deadlock to choose from, I'm on a mission to learn them all. I'm going to spend 50 games with each character to discover what they can teach me and how they can help me become a better player. Afterwards, I'll discuss my findings on things like builds, positioning, playstyle, and of course fun, all for the love of learning. So today, let's talk about Vindicta. As I've come to find my footing for this series, I've also begun to relish the challenge of it. While it can feel overwhelming at times, it's been fun to push myself into areas of the game I would previously avoid and try to overcome their difficulties. I gave my first gun hero a try last episode with Warden, and while I had a lot of fun with him and was happy with my performance, it also laid bare exactly what I was lacking in my skill set. I was inaccurate at range, my tracking wasn't very good overall, and I was falling back on Warden's abilities a bit too much. With that all in mind, for this episode, it only felt right for me to choose the farthest range hero I could, who also lives and dies by their accuracy, of course being Vindicta. Prior to setting this goal of playing the entire cast, I likely would have told you that I would never choose Vindicta, or even a flyer in general, as they just don't seem like my cup of tea. Each of Vindicta's strengths plays directly into each of my weaknesses as a player, since she requires high accuracy, she's heavily punished for mistakes, and her abilities aren't overly strong, instead really being there to bolster her gun. By all accounts, she seems like a terrible fit for me, but to my surprise, I had loads of fun with Vindicta and far more success than I was expecting. The idea for this series was always that if I push myself as far as I can outside of my comfort zone, I'll hopefully be able to adapt, overcome, and improve in the areas I'm weakest. My time with Vindicta proves to me that this idea will work, and while it'll come with a lot of struggling, it'll make it all the more triumphant when I crest that hill and finally click with a hero. So if you're unfamiliar with Vindicta, here's a quick rundown on her kit. Her one is her stake, which tethers enemies to the ground, restricting their movement to a small radius. The tether deals damage when it hits, as well as reducing movement speed by 40%, which when leveled gains extra damage, cooldown, duration, and radius. Her two is Vindicta's bread and butter, being flight, which allows Vindicta to leap into the air and fly for the ability's duration. While mid-air, Vindicta's bullets deal additional spirit damage, and she gains 50% extra item range, but she can't use her stamina to dash or move quickly. When upgraded, it adds 50% ammo when activated, gets extra duration, and at max will refresh the duration on hero kills while also increasing her spirit damage and scaling. Vin's 3 are her crows, which deal spirit damage on impact, bleeds heroes for 2.2% of their current health per second, and reduces resistances by 6%. When upgraded, they can also apply a 35% healing reduction, as well as extra bleed and shred, while also getting some extra cooldown and duration. Finally, Vindicta's 4 is Assassinate, where she aims down sights to charge up a powerful sniper shot, which deals spirit damage that also gains bonus damage on headshots and against targets below 50% health. Killing an enemy with the shot, or landing the shot shortly before an enemy dies, including if they die from another teammate, will grant you a stack of permanent weapon damage, which is an extra 6% at base. Assassinate is also a charge ability, which comes with 2 charges at base and a 2.5-second time between charges. Upgrading the ability grants you extra cooldown, bonus damage against low health targets, and it bumps the weapon damage stacks from 6% to 10%, which also applies retroactively to stacks gained before the upgrade. On paper, I had found Vindicta's abilities to be pretty complicated and layered, but fortunately she was a lot easier to wrap my head around when I was actually playing her. It took me a bit to memorize all the buffs and percentages and bonuses I'd be getting, but I did feel like I got off the ground with her pretty quickly, and by the end of my time with her I was able to take advantage of each of those nuances. What it really boiled down to was just flying into the air, staking enemies to keep them in the open, bleeding targets for the anti-heal, and getting as many stacks from my ult as possible. While it certainly wasn't the most action-packed way to play the game, I really enjoyed how unique Vindicta felt, requiring me to play at a completely different pace than I was used to. Just as I would have to steadily build up my items throughout the game, I'd have to steadily build up stacks, which made my performance in the early game far more important, as well as my involvement in subsequent team fights. Getting a snipe off as soon as I got my ult meant I could start to pull ahead, and if I was able to get multiple stacks in lane, I could easily begin to snowball for the rest of the game. Similarly, if I was behind on stacks, showing up for a big team fight and tagging a few enemies as they died meant I could go from shooting pebbles to shooting nukes in a matter of seconds. I think balancing Vindicta's kit was an absolute blast overall, and getting stacks from landing snipes is such a satisfying gameplay loop. It ties Vin together so nicely, and it also has such a fantastic interaction with every other aspect of the game, from positioning to how you might approach phases, to of course how you might build. Similar to Warden, Vindicta really shines when built hybrid, as both spirit and gun damage are equally woven throughout her kit. Her bullet damage scales with spirit, flight outputs both damage types as you shoot, crows shred both types evenly, and while snipes deals spirit damage, it grants those stacks of weapon damage with each successful shot. It's such an elegant balance, and it opens up countless options for how you might want to approach playing Vindicta. For me personally, when it came to lane, there were two main ways that I would approach Vindicta, with one rushing the 4.8k spirit spike, and one starting out with some gun items, both of them having some give and take. If I wanted to focus entirely on getting stacks, I think spirit was the way to go so I could do as much damage with my ult as possible, but it did mean that I'd be doing a bit less damage overall until the ult was online. Alternatively, if I wanted to apply more pressure in lane before getting my ult, investing in some gun items helped massively, and it could still result in a lot of stacks. I would just need to chip enemies down further before I tried to snipe them. Both options worked, and with how Vindicta's bullet damage scales, they kind of balanced out in the end, but I'll touch on that as I discuss the items. For the spirit spike, it was as easy as could be with extra and improved spirit, as well as rapid recharge. Since snipe is a charge ability, this gets you 4 shots total, and it'll reduce the time between charges from 2.5 seconds to 1.8 seconds. Once I had these items, bullets were dealing 29 damage, flight was adding an extra 21 damage in spirit, which totaled to 50 per shot, and snipe was dealing 215 max damage. For my gun route, I went with high velocity rounds to make shots easier to hit at range or while I was in flight, as well as extended mag for some extra ammo to push waves. The big ticket item, however, was long range, which extends damage fall off distance while also netting extra damage when beyond 15 meters. This is a great choice for a few reasons, since in flight and just generally in lane, I would find myself far enough to where my weapon was falling off, but long range would either keep me within distance or the increased damage would help to balance out the fall off. Once I had long range, I would invest into spirit, which did mean that my snipes would do less damage when I first got my ult, but I'd be able to apply a lot more pressure during lane, which could potentially net me earlier kills or help to take tower. With high velocity, extended mag, long range, and improved spirit, each bullet dealt 38 damage, but it dealt 64 damage a shot while in flight and activating long range. These numbers would change as I took different ranges or were in different scenarios, but since the same could be said for the spirit spike numbers, this does result in a higher damage output. With the lower investment in spirit, however, snipes were dealing noticeably less damage at 152 max. If I took out improved spirit and just looked at the gun items, I was still dealing 58 damage a shot in flight, meaning I could output more total damage from an earlier point into the game if I started with gun items. I do again think both options work well, but I generally ended up going for long range first, as otherwise I would feel like I just wasn't doing very much in lane and was betting too much on netting stacks. However, once I had the 4.8k spirit spike, weapon damage would balance out as long as I wasn't dealing with too much fall off, so I would probably consider rushing spirit to be the more quote-unquote optimal way to go about it. The spirit damage from flight does also have fall off like the bullets do, so for me, the question was always just whether I got long range before or after rapid recharge, and I would usually just go with before. Once I had my spirit spike sorted with rapid recharge, I'd upgrade long range to sharpshooter, which alongside extended mag and high velocity would land me at my gun spike. For my vitality spike, I really like enduring speed since it does increase your movement speed in flight, and I'd also go with either counterspell or dispel magic to counter things like knockdown depending on my matchups. Otherwise, there's a few standout items I really enjoyed on Vindicta, with burst fire being a big one. Vindicta's base fire rate is pretty low, so she does sorely need some amount of fire rate built in, and since burst fire also gets you extra movement speed when you shoot a hero, it's a perfect fit for flight to continue pressuring enemies. Crippling was also a go-to for me to counter any tankier teams or higher healing, and I'd also usually go with lucky shot once I had a few stacks rolling so I could hit as hard as I could. Balanced spirit helped to max out my spirit damage, so if I was falling behind on getting as many stacks as I wanted, I would get boundless before a tier 4 gun item so I could try to catch up on stacks. Cooldown and duration are also both great options for Vindicta, as all of her cooldowns are pretty long even when upgraded, and everything but snipe will benefit from duration. I would, however, usually skip duration and just get cooldown since I didn't rely too heavily on things like stakes or crows, and once flight was fully upgraded, I was happy with the cooldown and could refresh it pretty consistently during team fights. hits. Finally, my favorite item with Vindicta was Mystic Slow upgraded into Lightning Scroll. Mystic Slow helps massively with hitting shots since each bullet you land while flying will deal spirit damage and will apply that slow immediately. It'll also stack with the slow from Stake to increase its effect, as well as add in that additional threat of the slow to your crows, but hands down, Lightning Scroll was where it was at. The stun from the scroll meant that if I tagged an enemy but didn't kill them, I could just stay scoped up, charge the next shot, and wait for them to get stunned to essentially guarantee a second fully charged shot on them. If the shots didn't kill them and they died from the spirit damage from Lightning Scroll, it would happen fast enough for me to still gain a stack from ult, which was amazing and came in handy constantly. Overall, I had loads of fun building around Vindicta, and the intricacies of her abilities opened up so many different options for me. Up to this point, I would usually fall into a groove with the heroes I played where I would buy the same items each time in lane, but buying items based on my objectives for my early game or how heavily I expected to pressure my lane was a great exercise for me. It's definitely something I want to take forward into other heroes, and while it does seem like a small thing, it feels like a big step forward in my understanding and approach to build crafting. So, how was my time with Vindicta? What did I learn, and what should I continue to improve on? I had a blast with Vindicta, but I also found her to be pretty difficult to play. She's a character that's relatively hard to pilot overall, and while the nuances of her kit are fun and interesting to work around, they can also be extremely punishing. However, that challenge is exactly what I enjoyed the most about my time with Vin, and I'm thrilled to have pushed myself this far out of my comfort zone. By being punished so heavily for my mistakes and by having to work so specifically around Vindicta's kit, I achieved a deeper understanding of Vindicta than I have of other heroes. Where with Warden, an example, he was simple enough that I felt I could adapt him to my playstyle. With Vindicta, I had to adapt everything to hers. Netting stacks, an example, was an extremely fun aspect of Vindicta, but it was also what would make or break my games with her. If I had a bad lane and I went into mid-game with no stacks, I'd often find it difficult to catch back up, potentially leading me to a game where I would contribute almost nothing. I wouldn't be able to confidently fight anybody, and if I showed up to a team fight, I'd struggle to help at all unless enemies were low enough for me to snipe. On the other hand, if I had a great lane and I went into mid-game with multiple stacks, I'd be a much larger threat in fights both solo and grouped, and I'd be able to put out much higher damage to get subsequent stacks easier. Once I pulled ahead, I'd often be able to ride the momentum for the rest of the game, and I could completely shred enemies while getting stronger every time I fought. While Vindicta's dependence on her stacks made it far more challenging to play her, it also made me more focused and aware of each phase of the game, analyzing what I would need to do within them to succeed. I really enjoyed the strategic depth of Vindicta as a result, and I also felt like it was a great lesson to take into other heroes. Instead of just fixating entirely on building items or netting kills, I'll be able to look more broadly at what strengths my hero can bring to each phase of the game, and what I can do moment to moment to maximize that. From a mechanics perspective, Vindicta was very difficult for me to play, as the distance she naturally takes in flight makes it much harder to consistently land shots. Her bullet velocity is pretty good, and her weapon range is great, but it was still tough to find the sweet spot of where I wanted to be while flying, and how I should properly engage without access to cover. Since Vin relies so heavily on her gun damage, I had a much harder time with her early on, but as I got used to landing my shots, by the end of my time, I felt like I had a pretty good handle on things. However, since so much of the game on the ground relies on things like movement and terrain, I ended up finding flight to be rather awkward to use. I did try to take cover around corners of buildings or behind signs, but I'd mostly end up just sort of drifting around in the open, which would occasionally cause me a lot of problems. I was usually at a far enough range where any damage enemies were dealing to me was negligible, but heroes that could quickly close the gap on me, like a Mina or even a Lash, ended up causing me a bunch of issues. With more time on Vindicta, I'm sure I'd get more accustomed to flight, but overall, I'm happy with how I did, considering how drastically different she is from piloting other heroes. In the end, I'm thrilled with how I did on Vindicta, and I'm really glad I pushed myself to try her. She was, in a lot of ways, almost a stress test of my abilities, and while there were several sore spots for me during the experience, I'd have to say overall I think I did pretty good. I felt pretty accurate, I was dealing good damage and netting a lot of kills, and on a macro level, I've increased my understanding of the game's phases and how I should be interacting with them. While I wasn't exactly popping off with Vindicta meta or hitting crazy plays. I loved her slow, strategic style, and engaging with such a drastically different pace of play taught me a lot about how to approach games with phases in mind. Similarly, she tested my accuracy, challenged my approach to build crafting, and punished me for my mistakes to make me play more carefully and more thoughtfully. This episode may be a smaller step forward for me than others, but regardless, it's one that feels meaningful and one that I really enjoyed. I'll definitely be returning to Vindicta in the future, and I'm looking forward to taking what I learned from her into the rest of the cast. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what you think of Vindicta and what heroes you might like to see me learn for the series. I've also put the build ID in the description for my hybrid Vindicta build if you're looking for a place to start, and you can also subscribe to the channel to keep an eye out for more videos soon.